And good afternoon as well. My name is Shahida Arif, and I am the Regional Learning Advisor with START Network and CDAC Network Disaster Emergency Preparedness Program based in Islamabad. And I'm also part of Learning Project, which is hosted by Action Against Hunger UK. I'm your facilitator for today's webinar. Before we go into session online and details, I would like to request our two wonderful speakers for introductions. So Jeremy, would you like to go first, please?
Thanks, Shahida, and good afternoon or morning to all from Bangkok. So my name is Jeremy Wellard. I'm ICFA's regional representative for Asia, and ICFA is a global network of humanitarian NGOs made up of local, regional, and international NGOs working in humanitarian action. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Berhanu, would you like to go next now? Berhanu, are you there?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm Brahanu Galuto, a director for one local organization in Ethiopia, local NGO, called Rift Valley Children and Women Development Organization. And I have got an opportunity to be connected to this event through the Shifting Power Project. And we are, my organization is one of the local organization benefiting from the initiative that consortia of organizations are putting in terms of shifting power of humanitarian response in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Berhanu. Thank you, Jeremy, for joining us for today's webinar as our key speakers. Just to start with, I think localization of aid has become a key policy area for many international and national humanitarian organizations quite recently. And was a major theme in 2016 World Humanitarian Summit, sparking initiatives such as the Charter for Change and the Grand Bargain. However, most conversations, whatever we are experiencing on localization, still taking place at the global level or at the regional level, while the execution of this movement is at the local level and it's far from uniform or kind of like coordinated or collaborative effort. So what we are going to do in today's webinar, so we are going to explore that how localization is being understood at the local, national, and regional level. Because we feel, and it's been understood as well, that one size does not fit all when it comes to localization. So how are these global discussions on localizations being taken forward? Does contextualization of preparedness and response programming contribute to the localization agenda, etc.? So how this webinar is structured then, so I'm going to share a session outline with you. So first we will have successes and lessons and challenges on contextualization of localization from ICWA. As Jeremy shared, ICWA is the International Council of Volunteer Agencies. So it's more sort of like ICWA's reflection that how localization and contextualization is being understood and what are the challenges and lessons so far. Then we'll go to a bit more like localized context and covering one country from Africa, its localization and contextualization, and talking about experiences of DEPP. And as mentioned and shared by Berhanu, that it's more about that how Shifting the Power project, which is one of the 14 projects of DEPP, is supporting localization. And after that, we will open this webinar session for discussion, so you can also contribute, and you can, as Elizabeth mentioned at the beginning, you can note down your questions, or even during the proceedings, you can write down your questions in chat box, and then we can take these questions towards the end of this webinar and after the presentations from two speakers. So if you have any admin related questions or queries, so please raise with Liz and Alice as mentioned at the beginning. We can start now. So I would like to request Jeremy to share reflections from ICWA around contextualization and localization.
Great, thanks Shahida, and hello again to all. Look, I'm very happy to join this discussion and I think to kick off, but also to really participate in the discussion with all of those online, because I think, as mentioned, there is a lot of talk around localization happening at global and regional levels, and certainly at national level as well. But we don't necessarily take enough time to consider, I think, this issue of how these discussions are being contextualized at different levels enough. And in my mind, I think this is really actually a critical point for the sector at the moment in turning the narrative of localization into some kind of practical outcome. I think this is work that has to be done both by the international sector and the international actors in terms of understanding what's happening at local levels, and also work that has to be done by local actors, national actors, to help these other actors actually understand what the work in their contexts means. ICFA's been very involved in the global discussions around localization through the Grand Bargain, the World Humanitarian Summit, and a lot of the work that our members have been doing on this topic. And I think what we try to continually bring the conversation back to is the idea that the future of humanitarian action is an ecosystem of diverse actors, not a centrally controlled top-down system. And this really, I think, outlines where the idea of contextualization fits within the whole discussion, because to have an ecosystem, we need to actually really be working in the environments that the different actors involved are based in, are operating in, and actually understand at the most intimate level. And you cannot, in this sense, manage the narrative by actually having a global kind of controlling voice on what localization is, what it's going to mean. When we talk about contextualization,
Jeremy, are you there? Jeremy, are you there? I think we lost Jeremy.
I think he's dropped off.
Shall we? Yeah, I think we can request maybe Berhanu to continue with his session, and then meanwhile Jeremy can log in again.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so Jeremy was talking about successes and lessons and challenges on contextualization from ICFA's perspective. But as we lost him, so now we are going to pass on to the next speaker, Berhanu, who is going to share experiences from the DEPP Shifting the Power project, which is being implemented in Ethiopia. So Berhanu, are you there?
Hello, hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, Berhanu, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. As I indicated in my introduction, I work in a local organization that has emerged from within the community and has evolved into an NGO through time. Yes, as it can be seen, it is Rift Valley Children and Women Development Organization. To the next slide, maybe. The organization is by individuals in the Central Rift Valley who have been marginalized under different regimes. And it is sort of an offspring of a movement, and we consider ourselves as a community organization, but grows through time to address a number of issues. We particularly focus on children, women, youth, and elderlies in all our engagement. In our interventions, we focus on the interlocking problem of communities like poverty, illness, ignorance, and inequalities. And these are the key focus areas of development. And Rift Valley is a developmental organization, is not a pure humanitarian organization, but it is a developmental organization. Currently, it is operating in one, according to the Ethiopian structure, we have a national state and regional state. We are operating in one of the regional states, which constitute more than 40% of the country, mainly in the central Rift Valley and southeastern pastoralists, addressing the causes of poor people. We implement integrated programs, but mainstream humanitarian in areas of our operation to address the needs as it happens. Organizationally, we work through grassroots facilitation by living within the community to bring sustainable changes. We work in consortia with others like the CBOs, cooperative structures, community-based organizations in terms of advancing our values. We also have started putting a structure that will promote community-based accountability system where people will strategically focus and comment on what we do at grassroots level, and we try to address people's interest at the grassroots level than imposing the mindset that we have. Saying this as a background of Rift Valley, we got connected to the DEPP due to the Shifting Power project, one of the projects as indicated in the disaster emergency preparedness program. And in this process, we partnered with ActionAid, one of the consortium members here in Ethiopia, in advancing the project. And this was an important link because we have long-term development program in highly marginalized and vulnerable communities in Ethiopia, in the southeastern pastoralist areas. And as ActionAid has identified Rift Valley as one of the local partners for Shifting Power project. And we have benefited a lot from the initiatives. Some of the major benefits includes, strategizing humanitarian response. We are in the process of developing a strategy that will be inclusive of humanitarian response beyond mainstreaming, which was a traditional way we do. Now we are in the process of duly considering humanitarian response as an important program of the organization. There is also a organizational systems and procedures revisiting, because humanitarian response requires different structures, different procedures in terms of response. So those are important benefits. The other is the initiative has enhanced the skills and know-how of our staffs and local partners in particularly how to conduct a rapid assessment and respond timely. Areas like standards and principles of humanitarian responses. And now the staffs are highly equipped and they are in a better position to deliver as required. As organization, the structure, the board has also made a decision to institutionalize the structure, the humanitarian response in the organizations to be considered for the organization to be pragmatic in its engagement. Through benefiting through this project, some of the concerns that we as a local institutions benefiting from or partnering in Shifting Power project with number of Ethiopian international organizations operating in Ethiopia are like now the capacity building lacks a holistic approach because it's not only system, procedures, and the like, but there are other elements that are important in terms of these organizations to be more active. The other is, yes, as it is indicated in the DEPP project, there is some sort of disconnect or phase-oriented, start with one, strengthening, go to the next steps. And those needs to be holistic, should be integrated. Another issue that we want to share is the level of power decision-making at a local level in terms of accessing resources, building capacities, and the like. I think that seems less devolved, particularly in the consortia and also other actors. There is high know-how and decision-making at upper level, maybe at regional or some sort of arrangement. It may be due to the nature of the project. Going to the essence of localization, these are perceptions, and also not only from humanitarian response, but also in the context of development too. As it is indicated even by previous speakers, there are a lot of global initiatives that backs the need for localization and contextualization of humanitarian engagement. There is a need for increased role and engagement of local actors. The practice is the international actors, outsiders are more active in the past, but there is a lesson that has been learned in terms of devolving this. And the important element is that has been indicated in a number of instruments is issue of accountability to affected people and local structures for sustaining the engagement. And the good thing again is there is a paradigm as indicated on a number of initiatives, even under the DEPP. There is a paradigm shift in the nature and type of relationships or partnership that could be advanced to ensure realistic localization and contextualization. With respect to conceptual understanding, these are how I perceive in my organization. Yes, it is a relative term. People define the concept or the term based on the interest and the experiences. And this is a difficult area, particularly in terms of a pragmatic engagement. As an approach, again, localization is a process of decentralized authorities, decision-making powers. That should happen at the grassroots level. Not only the structure or political will, but also including resources at local level. I don't mean only the national structure, but even to the structure in the community that are responsive. It is about, again, building local responsive capacity, because there are a number of actors who are within the affected people whose capacity should be built, and there should be a responsive engagement of those actors. And again, and we also envisage for the existence of genuine and inclusive partnership in the localization. These are elements that should be considered when we want to advance a realistic localization. Conceptually, in terms of context, localization means it is about people are with their own wisdom. They are not in a vacuum. They have potentials and they have their own wisdoms in terms of addressing hazards or a number of crises that happens since a long time. So it is about building on those structures, on those wisdoms, know-hows. The other is about how to translate the global standards, minimum humanitarian standards, core humanitarian principles to the local level, to the local contexts, because there are differences in the including psychological makeup of the people, but without compromising the quality. It's important to consider these areas. This is a contentious area that we usually see when humanitarian engagement is there in the community. Systematic integration of the indigenous knowledge of the people with the modern skill. There is a need for those mode of engagement. in terms of contextualization, so that there will be ownership at community level or at grassroots level for sustained engagement. In terms of value addition, what I envisage, or my reflection is, I think localization and contextualization will enhance accountability, better accountability. It's about walking the talk. So if it happens, it's a realistic way of ensuring accountability to people affected in terms of response. It ensures the existence of sustainable institutional engagement for future hazards or response to disaster or emergencies that is going to happen in the community. Again, it helps to build local capabilities and the leadership consistent with the requirement at international or global level. If localization is popularized, then there will be advanced partnership at equal footing. That is lacking nowadays. It's difficult to operationalize. As it is indicated in a number of documents, it is just like subcontracting, and which is also a problem in terms of advancing the causes. The other is if localization is practiced well, as it is demanded, although this there is multitude of engagement, the capacity of the community to respond to disaster will be enhanced. People will be in a better position, and there will be less external support, and the preparedness is more realistic. And these are certain values that we envisage, not only even in humanitarian, but in the development, if the South-South relationship is going to be strengthened. Some of the key, the other is a reflection on some of the key lessons and the challenges of such an instrument, such global instrument. One difficulty that we have as a local actor is the accountability of and operationalization of international commitments. Mention number of international commitments. It ends with certain ideology, and these are key concerns, and how global commitment, global initiatives should be operationalized, and their accountability could be ensured is a lesson that we need to take. The other is operational or enabling environment. This is in the context of both Ethiopia and donors. For example, international NGOs in Ethiopian context are forced to be operational at grassroots level. I don't know exactly whether there is a legal requirement, but there are the enabling environment is forcing. And in the process, although some international NGOs, which are even consortia members of Shifting the Power, are committed to work through partnership, they are forced to be operationalized. And in this process, they are, their intent to be present in Ethiopia is also narrowing the space that local institution will have. So the political economy of the country is an issue that should be considered. And in addition to donor expectation, like we know in the case of EU and others, regarding the quality, documentation, and other requirements, which will be a challenge to the localization. Another element that we usually, even in the consortia or member of implementing organization, that we usually talk about is the trust and the ownership of local actors. Even in the Shifting Power project, it is globally initiated, and the engagement of local institutions in the initiation was not there. It is a global initiative that is, cascaded down to local level. So the issue of trust and ownership of the initiative is a question due to the traditional power relationship that has happened, because most of the organizations are developmental and they have mainstream humanitarian. And this is the key in terms of actions. There is also even an example in terms of the local capabilities, as it is indicated in CRD's report on forming the advocacy structures to influence the humanitarian structure. there is, I think, no space for local institutions in humanitarian coordination activities. Although demanded, it is difficult to penetrate, and it needs continuous engagement, both at local level and international level, to have better position. The other is, this is a thinking. There are global principles, standards in terms of providing humanitarian support to people affected, but the local contexts are different in terms of, for example, the amount of water that should be delivered to people affected, and there are under a fair standard and the other minimum requirement that is promoted globally. And this is a critical, how to create those linkage, how to maintain the quality, and also understand the local context is an issue, not only in humanitarian, but even in development. That is a key concern we have. Another is, yes, I value the existence of international organizations and the complementarity role that we can play at local and international, as local and international actors. But the balance, there is importance due to various nature. It is difficult to disconnect. And the issue of, where is the divide in terms of the relationship, in terms of the power. Those are important elements that should be considered to talk, to walk the talk, as it is indicated in number of instruments. That is fantastic, but to operationalize it. And these are some of the thoughts that I had prepared in terms of talking to friends, and also from my own maybe 25 experience working in local organization. That is the end, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Berhano. That was just amazing. We had some reflections from participants. We are not going to take any questions right now, but I can just share one or two reflections. So Shahana shared that solutions of humanitarian crisis in such connected world require intervention from multilateral agencies at global and regional level. For example, she gave an example from refugee crisis, climate change. In this context, how we are unfolding, localizing in terms of whose capacity and who is shifting. Then we had a reflection from Chala, and he said, like, localization is not about substituting. It is all about providing complementary services to disaster affected communities, as local as possible and as international as necessary. We had one question from Dayan, and we also have some more reflections from other participants, which we can take after Jeremy's presentation. So Jeremy, are you there?
Yes, I am here, yes.
Okay, good. So over to you.
Okay, thank you, and apologies to all for the connection troubles I'm having. Seems a little bit of internet connectivity issues here today. It's really interesting to actually listen to Berhano's comments then, and to actually reflect on some of these comments in the relation of what I was planning to talk about. And I think I'd like to just mention a few specific activities and pieces of work or questions that are coming up in the region at the moment that we really need to try to focus on in the frame of this discussion on contextualization. I think for ourselves, we've been really trying to address the issue that was raised about the representation in consortia ourselves, and really looking at ourselves as an NGO network, trying to understand how we can get closer to our members in the regional and national levels and understand better what is happening in their contexts. In order to do this, we actually opened up regional hubs. We now have 4, 2 in Africa, 1 in Middle East, and 1 in Asia, that are actually trying to help us connect with our members and our other NGO partners at the national level, at the regional level. And in particular, at the moment, we're really looking at the role that NGO networks play at national level, how they create platforms for the transfer of the global discussions to the national and then to the subnational, to the operational contexts. And we think this work is critically important for the NGOs, for the consortia themselves, and for organizations that working at the regional and global level, such as ICFA, because we need more avenues where we can actually have discussions in context, about the context, and actually really look at how we are creating truly useful ways of bringing global discussions to local level, bringing local knowledge to the global level. We think that NGO networks, NGO fora, are actually a key player in this work, and this piece is something that we're focusing on very much in the coming time. Also, in the regional level, ICFA has been working with NGOs and their engagement with regional organizations. In Asia with ASEAN, in Africa with African Union and IGAD, and trying to actually look at how we can help NGOs strengthen their role in the context of emerging actors who bring a whole new perspective to the regional humanitarian landscape. And so in the Asia region, we've been working with a group of NGOs that's been involved with ASEAN for over 10 years, trying to help them to engage more national actors from the ASEAN member countries into their discussions, actually to broaden this network, to make it more localized and to help it connect on the ground level. And really trying to do this in partnership with the regional organization, with the national governments, and with all the NGOs that are involved. I reflect on another point that was raised about the contextualization of standards, and the fact that earlier this week in Bangkok, there was a meeting of the Sphere project where the global focal points from the various countries around the world actually came together to talk about exactly this topic, how to contextualize the standards to local settings. I'm not sure if any of our participants today are a part of the Sphere project or are actually any focal points on the call who might even be able to contribute more to this later in the discussion. But I think it was really exciting to see that this work is being undertaken in the context of the revision of the Sphere handbook, which is underway at the moment, to ensure that it's really set up in a way that allows it to be contextualized as much as possible. I'll just quickly, a few more points because I know we're short on time and we'd like to get to some discussion. I just thought I'd mention a couple of examples where I think there's been some strong effort to actually put into practice some of the localization discussions in various contexts in the Asia region. One example that I mention often, and I think it's important for other countries to consider, is the participation of NGOs in the HCT in Myanmar, which is a very interesting structure that was set up over quite a lot of work by the NGOs involved at the national and subnational level, to end up now with a structure that has 4 INGO, 4 national NGO seats in the HCT and 1 NGO co-chair. And I think this is really something that could be seen as best practice that could be exported into other contexts. I know there's some ideas in the Philippines, for instance, about how we can strengthen the advocacy with the HCT to actually look at similar models from some of the other countries in the region. And I think this is one that can be shared and learned from, in terms of actually ensuring that there is more seats at the table in the first place, and that secondly, that these seats are evenly distributed. So we do have more of that balance of power that was referred to before. I think also in the region at the moment, we have a large and rapidly evolving response happening in Bangladesh, and I do hope someone involved in that response is on the call, because I think this is a very interesting example of how localization discussions can be taking place very, very strongly in one context, which is in disaster management, disaster response in Bangladesh. And then a response comes along which is not related to that context, as we have now with a refugee setting. And really, I think there's a lot of lessons that need to be learned from what's happened in Bangladesh in the past few months around the scale up of the refugee response, and how there's been the attempts to transport a lot of the great work that was done around strengthening local action in the disaster setting to this different context. And really, I think it raised a lot of questions for national and international actors about how they were engaging in these different discussions and what actually had been brought forward that was applicable across to different contexts. What else should have been done in preparedness that maybe could have helped to prepare for a different type of humanitarian response, and which elements of the localization approach were actually cross-cutting or able to come across. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done in the coming months to do more evaluation and consideration of this as a great example of different contexts and how localization has been impacted. And finally, just a point, I think, on a interesting example on donor behavior in the region. And I think donor behavior is really important in this topic. Example from the Philippines of how one donor is actually working to contract national NGOs and then ensure that as part of that contracting arrangement, they are subcontracting international NGOs and UN agencies. And I think this is really, an example, and it's one of a few that I know of, and I hope there are more out there, of donors actually taking positive steps to ensure that these traditional power balances are turned on their heads and are actually, basically using their leverage as the funding agency to ensure that this happens. I think my final point would be a continuation on this point of engaging with donors. I think the Grand Bargain is seen as kind of the foundation on which a lot of localization discussions are based on, and certainly it was one where donors came to the table along with other partners. But further discussion.
Hi, Jeremy. Are you there? Seems we lost him again.
I think he was at his last point, so maybe we can move to discussion.
Yeah,
Hello,
yeah.
sorry,
just continue.
Actually, I was wrapping up my final point, so the timing was almost perfect. But the point was, I think the discussions with donors need to continue to happen at the regional and national level, and we need to ensure that this is not, the Grand Bargain is not seen as the end of this conversation, but actually the starting point for the conversation where we really do engage national actors, local actors in discussion with donors about how they're going to change their models of funding to be more contextually sensitive and more relevant. So I'll stop there. Over.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was really, really nice to have a bit more like understanding that what's happening at the region and global level, and how this has been taken forward at local level. And thank you for your suggestions. We have some questions from some participants. I think Shahana has got many points, but now we can just open this session for any question and answers and reflections. Just to start with, Dayan, would you like to unmute yourself and just ask your question? I think this is related to Berhano. And then we have also got a couple of questions listed from our side, which I can just go through. But if there are any other questions which you think you want to ask, or if there is any feedback or reflection, or you want to input, please, you can write in chat box, or you can request Liz and Alice, and they can unmute you, and you can even share your reflections with the through live. Yeah. Diane, I think we can go first with you.
Sure. I hope my voice is clear.
Yes.
Yes. So that is my question. You mentioned in Ethiopia that these are the challenges that you see, and I agree with those points. I would like to know what is your opinion in terms of the turnover of key staff, even country directors in organizations championing localization. I asked this question because I also spoke with someone from another campaign, and they also mentioned that these are the challenges when there's turnover and they don't even know at the global level. So how do you keep track with your champions on the ground? Thank you.
Berhano, would you like to answer this question?
I think my organization is a local organization working at grassroots level. Yes, there are cases in Ethiopia where turnover is there. Turnover is not only at international NGO, but even in local organizations, because staff with competencies in a specific organization leave for another job, and there are other opportunities even in private sector. That has critical impact in terms of advancing the interest that we want to promote. The capacity that has been built will be eroded through time. But the institutions need to design a mechanism of maintaining those capabilities that need to be undertaken. And that is a key challenge in Ethiopia.
Thank you, Berhano. Okay, so because we also want that we got like almost like over 20 participants in this webinar, so you should also contribute from your experiences and learnings. So there are a few questions, and these are just discussion questions. So if you got any example of success or challenges or movements towards localization, and if you can share that example with us, that would be really great. We really want to learn more that what were the factors that led towards that success at your in your context. So these are just some of the thoughts and discussion questions from our side. In the chat box, I can see another question, and probably this would relate with ICFAM or maybe Germany. You can. So is there any solid example that regional platform like SAARC or ASEAN really made a difference for effective solution? If not, how we are connecting such challenges with localization and contextualization? This is from Shahana again.
Yeah, thanks. Look, a great question, Shahana, and I think the answer is there's not really enough evidence to suggest that we can say there's been great successes. But I think what's important from our perspective is that the doors are opening to conversations and to actually including local and national NGOs in these discussions, rather than always defaulting to only engaging with UN agencies or the more influential INGOs. So we see a good trajectory in the discussions and in the opportunities in the future. But we also recognizing, I think, the emerging role of particularly regional actors. I mean, in some ways, ASEAN is quite developed with the AHA Center and its disaster management framework, but it's got a very limited and focused scope. Some of the other organizations have much more of a potential to be involved in broader humanitarian settings, and may actually move quite quickly to establish better frameworks for engagement and hopefully more regionally and locally contextualized frameworks that are going to be working in their settings. Over.
Thank you, Jeremy. Is there any other question from anyone?
Just to mention, I think Shahana had an interesting point about women's disempowerment and how that interacts with international standards. I wonder, Shahana, if you could elaborate on that point or question.
Shahana, are you there? Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the question from the Bangladesh context and maybe the Asian context also. That in SPEAR we always talking about that affected population must be in the decision-making process. But in Bangladesh context, whenever any disaster hits or man-made disaster hits or human-made disaster hits, then we found that women felt very disempowered because of the cultural issues in Bangladesh. Now, when we are talking about contextualization or localization, is that mean that, okay, we'll leave women behind, and in the name of the culture, in the name of the context, we can ignore the global standard? So that's probably a time to have more clarity. What does it really mean, contextualization? Because I'm sometimes worried if we are over contextualized, then we might lose the values of the global standard or humanitarian standard.
Thank you, Shahana. Very interesting. So Jeremy or Berhano, who wants to respond to this question or comment maybe?
No, I don't have a response to that.
Jeremy, would you like to respond? Or anyone in the in this group, anyone who wants to contribute from this perspective?
I think it would be great to hear from anyone who's working in more of an operational context on this question, because it's certainly very important, but not something that I would be able to comment on from ICFA's perspective. Over.
Okay, and if you want to, if anyone that they don't want to just like speak, you can also write your responses in chat box, and you can share and you can respond to Shahana's point. I think it's a very good discussion point, Shahana. Probably what we can do is we can also include this in our discussion forum on DEPP learning platform, where we can talk about more that how contextualization is being understood in relation to global standards and how local can be, and similarly. So there are, of course, some takeaways from this webinar which we can discuss at other platforms as well. There is one question which is from Jeremy towards this group. So has anyone been involved in discussions with donors at national level about how and if they will be able to shift their models to be more contextualized? So if someone within this group who is on call, if you are or were in discussion at the national level with any donor, and would you like to share some examples, if any? No? Okay. So we got some other discussion questions as well. One of the discussion question that I want to mention and share here is, what are some of the contextually specific challenges to localization country, and how has this impacted the localization agenda? So can anyone respond from the group, or maybe or two speakers? Berhano, would you like to respond to these questions, that any context-specific challenges? I know that you have mentioned some of the challenges, but that was more in relation to DEPP. But if there are any context-specific challenges at the country level, and how those challenges actually impacted the overall localization agenda in the country?
Yeah. Maybe one example is the challenge with or no, there are it is about how to change the traditional way of doing things, the mindset and behavior that we have in those days, in the experiences, have an impact even within individual, not only organization, within the individual, in terms of disempowering self to empower the others. So one of the challenge is how to change the mindset or unlearn the old ways of doing things. This is what's happening in the staff, what's happening in the structures that make key decisions.
That's interesting. Any reflections from the group? Okay, that's fine. Okay, I think, okay, so we got a question hi Jeremy, in the PHL, ACO is conducting consultations on localization of aid. INGOs have been engaging, and as always, differences in POV. So it's from Jing. So Jeremy, or maybe first, Jing, would you like to elaborate further on this, and then Jeremy can respond to it? Okay, that's fine. Okay, Jeremy, do you have any thought or word on this, or that's fine? That's fine.
No, look, thank you, Jing. Obviously, you're unusually shy today to jump on the microphone, but I think it's a really good point, and I certainly would be interested to hear more as these consultations unfold, because especially as you mentioned, ECHO, we're hearing different progress at the regional and national level. So it's great to hear that there is actually progress moving forward in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jing and Jeremy. Okay, so we can take one example from Shahana. Shahana, go ahead.
Example of localization. Can you hear me, Shahida?
Yes, yes.
Yes. One example of localizations, what I can give from one of the DEPP intervention in Bangladesh, from the talent development and shifting the power as well. That we all know that the influx of Myanmar citizens in Bangladesh created a huge challenge in the context of effective response. And one of the key one of the reasons for challenge is the cultural differences to understand the sufferings of the affected population. So what's happened that the Rohingya populations are living in Bangladesh from long time. So, so talent development partners and the shifting the power partners decided to engage those Rohingya people who lived in Bangladesh long time and understand the Bangladesh culture, also understand the Rohingya culture, to work as an interpreter. To understand the affected populations, the newly influx populations needs at the moment. So this is the, for me, this is the contextualizations or localizations. But if we are saying that, okay, well, we have to change the traditional systems and mindset of the traditional people, then probably again, we are not really contextualizing. So my point is that it is very difficult to balance localization, contextualization in terms of culture, in terms of language, also in terms of ensuring the global standard. So we really need to unfold what are the key challenges, and I'm sure that the DEPP planning team is going to carry out a research on localization, and those things will come out, that where the localizations were taking place and where we really need to understand the global need to be a great actor for localization, because localization doesn't mean that it will be a deglobalization.
Thank you, Shahana. That's very interesting. I think we just have one final comment from Fozia, and she is saying that other actors like local government has a key role in contextualization and which should be discussed. Yes, we agree that local government, local actors, of course, they are key. Within local actors, we need to further define that who local actors are, and there are discussions and there are documents as well which have been unfolded at the country and regional level. So local actors actually have a different different sort of like definition at different levels. We got one more reflection. Happy to share quick thoughts on how the coordination system can also help amplify and strengthen localization. Yeah, sure, Antonio, go ahead. We still have a few more minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so everyone, my name is Anthony. I work with the Global Child Protection Area of Responsibility within the Protection Cluster. And just hearing what you've been talking about today has been really exciting and interesting. We've been looking at how the coordination system can also try and help agencies, organizations to take some of these initiatives to scale. And what we're seeing globally is there's a huge number of really wonderful pilots or country-specific programs, but they often don't go to scale. And two things I would encourage everyone to do is to go back to your coordinators and ask them what they're doing to take these ideas to scale. They can do things like advocacy around building a culture of principled partnerships. They can advocate for greater investments in localization and also for approaches to be taken at a sectoral level. They can promote and share the good practices that are happening. They can leverage funding, particularly from the pooled funds, but they're also in communication with donors all the time. about country priorities, and making sure that localization goes into the humanitarian response plan as a core part of the sectoral strategy, because that's how a lot of the funding and attention will get leveraged towards localized responses. And I mean, I could talk about it for a long time, so I'm happy for anyone to reach out to me bilaterally. We've got a number of tools and strategies that we've been promoting through particularly the child protection and the education clusters for coordinators to make sure they can be as helpful as possible for all of you who are trying to implement localized activities. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We also have one more speaker. So Jing, would you like to say something?
Hello everyone, this is Jing. I'm dropping in and out, so I hope that I'm not dropped out this time. So I'd like to speak about three things: funding, accountability, and standards. And these are the three very big issues that are actually hinder locally led responses. On funding, in the Philippines now, the local NGOs have banded together to look at how they can source responses through local fund mobilization. So we're now setting up, they are now setting up a fund by Filipinos for Filipinos. Because there's a lot of money in a middle income country, there's a lot of money in government. So instead of always depending on external aid, they're now looking at local fund mobilization. The other thing that I wanted to speak about is the biggest block to the lack of trust on locally led responses, the issue of accountability and standards. There is a perception that local CSOs are not as accountable or are not as up to standard compared to international NGOs or actors. So, but we're saying that this shouldn't be like a, how do you say it, a deal breaker, because accountability and standards, you can always build capacity around this. So this should not be used against local NGOs. Those are just the three things that we are working on in the Philippines for DEPP projects.
Thank you so much, Jing. It's always nice to hear from you. Thank you, everyone. We are almost on time. Today we had started off with more like in-depth discussion on contextualization. This is going to be continue on our DEPP learning platform, and after this webinar you will receive recordings as well as link to DEPP learning platform where we have discussion forum, so we can continue this discussion. And as mentioned by Shahana, we are also rolling out country level localization consultations, and we will also do one regional consultation in Bangkok in collaboration with ICWA, which is really great. And of course we will keep you posted that how this is unfolded. But just to add one line, what I learned from today's webinar is that we need to be a bit more active at the country and at the local level, and we need to actually engage everyone, be it a local organization, international organization, donor community, government, or any other relevant actor into this discussion, so we can create this bridge with the international community, making sure that we are providing enough evidence and experiences and contributing as well into global discussions on localization. So thank you so much. I'll hand over to Liz for final words. Over to you, Liz, and thank you from my side.
I don't have much more to add. Thanks to everybody for joining, and thanks to our two wonderful speakers for your presentations, and also everybody who contributed. As Shahida said, this recording and a link to the forums where we'll be continuing these discussions will be shared with all of you. And people are just saying thank you. Thank you, Diane. So yeah, we're going to sign off for now. Thank you, everybody, and I hope we can continue this discussion.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.